Hello, Lily. Welcome to Function First Care podcast.
Hello, Denise.
How are you?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, I'm excited.
Good.
I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
this.
great. So we actually met virtually at an independent practice sort of event, networking sort of event, and uh, from the Royal College of Occupational Therapy body. So yeah, it was a platform to support independent practitioners in their kind of independent practice and side hustle. So yeah, and then I was drawn to you because of your nature therapy work. So I invited you to Function First Care podcast, and we've had a chat since then. And yeah, so I would love to firstly, talk about your professional journey and therapeutic evolution. So could you start by introducing yourself and sharing a little about your journey into occupational therapy and the different settings you've worked in over the years?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Lily Vowles, and I have been an OT for just over 10 years. And so originally, before I was here, I studied architecture at university. And after I finished that degree, I really missed working with people. So I was just in a reflective sort of period, and I did some voluntary work at a charity. And they used sort of nature, they used like they had an allotment, and they had a cafe, and they also had like craft workshops and things like that. Basically it was for people with long-term health conditions, so whether it was physical health issues or mental health. It kind of operated a bit like a community, so people would come, and it was a place to kind of network and just be, and I really, yeah, I just, the values of the place kind of drew me back to it. And through that I met somebody who was going to train as an OT, and that was at the point when I was like, oh, like what is this? So it kind of led me on the path of finding out more. And I just loved the idea of being able to use sort of meaningful activity as a therapeutic intervention. So that was why I returned to study and trained. And just thought I was very friendly. Um, and
You got
so
nature indoors as well, I can see.
Yes, yeah. I've
Coming
got like all
through.
the doors open because it's so hot, so might be a few visitors.
Hey, this
Um,
podcast is all about keeping it, authentic. So yeah, love it that we've got the indoors coming to you as well.
yeah.
The outdoors, sorry, coming to you.
Yeah, and so when I was doing my training, I did a placement that was kind of just very like deeply like affecting, and it was in a secure hospital. And when I did that placement, I just really, there was something about it that just I felt very sort of motivated by and inspired by, to really support people that have been in contact with the law and have mental health issues. And so that placement really kind of supported my decision when I qualified to get a job in the forensics sector. And I worked in a medium secure unit for a number of years. And then I worked in like a community team for people once they had left the unit and were being supported in the community in different ways. And I loved working there. It was very challenging. But at that point, I sort of felt like if I didn't change or leave, then I probably would always work there, because I think once you've got that level of experience and you're kind of invested in it, it's so much harder to kind of leave. So I sort of felt kind of called to change things up. And then after that, I kind of did a number of different jobs throughout the sort of mental health sector. So I did sort of vocational rehab. I also did mental health rehab, early intervention in psychosis. And yeah, it was quite a journey really, because from being like in an inpatient service to then being in the community, I kind of it was just very different, and I did enjoy it, but I kind of was kind of keen to sort of explore different options and areas. And then after early intervention in psychosis, I so I did some training in wild therapy, and I knew of a charity that was working in a more creative and natural way, with children and families, and to work there, I needed to get some more experience with children. So I did a year, just under a year, in pediatrics, in OT, community OT, which was much more sort of physical health orientated. So sort of sensory work and different assessments and school at home and things. But yeah, so after that, then I went to work for this charity, which is where I am at the moment, which is a kind of so it's not an OT specific post, but I'm a caseworker there, and I can kind of use all of my training and skills, but working, in the way that the charity also likes to work. But that's also coming to an end. So this is this is
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at, a new point, really.
Yeah, wow, your career is so interesting, incredible, and varied, and you've worked across, forensic mental health, inpatient rehab, early intervention in psychosis, pediatrics, vocational rehabilitation, and now in a much more integrative way.
Mm.
How has that journey shaped you as a practitioner?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's kind of led me on a journey, I think, to kind of really be more in tune with myself as well, I think, because initially when I was working in services where there were a lot of structure, a lot of rules, and very specific ways of working, I think at that time that suited me. And I think as time has gone on and I've grown in confidence and I've kind of wanted to explore working in a more creative, and kind of attuned, intuitive way, I've kind of like the opportunities have kind of reflected that. So it's gone from like being very kind of controlled environments to somewhere now where I'm working and there is a lot less structure and a lot less direction, and that's kind of also had to challenge me because I've had to really tune into like who I am and how do I want to work and what is kind of right and natural for me. So it's kind of put me at this point where, yeah, I really want to be able to work in the way that I really want to work and not be separate from that in a way.
I love that. Yeah, I can really resonate with that as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in certain areas of our lives, wherever we are, and I don't know if you feel it intuitively as well. Like I feel, sometimes when I've been in organizations, working in that structured way, I've
Mm,
wanted to kind of I felt that my creativity wasn't able to be unleashed like I am now with my
mm,
service organization company, Function First Care. Um, and now I'm able to, yeah, be very fluid and creative, and kind of
mm,
those opportunities are aligning with where I am in my life right now.
mm,
And I think, like as an entrepreneur, yes, it can be scary to kind of um, leave that, a
mm,
structured, stable employment for something that can be quite uncertain. But I really believe that when you take positive risks, it's just like rehabilitation. I really think that, taking a positive risks with clients in rehab,
mm,
and doing that with ourselves in our
mm,
in our own either personal and professional or professional circumstances can really make a positive difference, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, so you originally actually worked in some very intense mental health settings,
Mm.
including medium secure services. What first drew you to that work?
Yeah, I think for me it was just this idea of like really being able to work with people to kind of support them to like create the lives that were really that they wanted to lead. And I think it was a sense that, and I've always kind of had a strong sense of social justice that's sort of like internal to me. I can't walk past things if something's happening, or I kind of really value the positive aspects of humanity. And I guess, for me, I think intrinsically, we've all got like something to offer, something good within us. And I think it was just that sort of sense of like helping that bloom or blossom, or like helping people kind of find themselves again, after really difficult and traumatic times. And I guess a sense of, I remember I did some restorative justice training, and something that stuck with me in that was that, if you are in a community and somebody has done something bad or wrong, it's like you don't label them as bad or wrong. You recognize that something has happened, but you keep them in the community, you stay in contact with them, and that's like the true kind of process of healing, to maintain that and to support people through that. And yeah, and that was kind of really what led me into that, I think.
Love that. And yeah, I can really relate to you in terms of that strong sense of social justice, hence the creation of Function First Care, you know, to really have that, you know, preventative approach,
Mm.
healthcare approach, and have that collaborative platform with all different types of professionals who can really,
Mm.
you know, speak about preventative healthcare, and not just from um, a professional stance, but from their own personal lived experience and how
Mm.
that's shaped their career and their day-to-day lives and routines.
Mm.
So speaking of a strong sense of just social
Mm.
justice and about wanting to see the person beyond the offending history, how did those experiences shape your therapeutic approach?
Yeah, so I think those experiences kind of just really skilled me in being able to like really like listen to people, and to like, you might have preconceived ideas, or you might have ideas of like how someone should live their life or what they should do. But that work really kind of trained me to like be aware of all of what I'm carrying and maybe projecting onto this. And actually, if you can create the space, if you can be aware enough of yourself to really like support that person, and kind of connect with that, actually, like you you're not the one necessarily leading it, you're co-working with somebody in like a really sort of natural way. um and it just made me realize, like how unique and individual every single person is, and you can never really kind of guess where it will lead you, and kind of just and I loved that really. I think it was just, if you like people, then you're just going to be like inspired, and it kind of, yeah, kind of really, you can be led in that way.
Mm,
um
yeah. I
yeah.
I've worked in prison services as an occupational sort of in an occupational therapy
Mm.
profession, and yeah, and it just made me kind of reflect when you were talking around your work about really kind of sort of supporting the person holistically,
Mm.
um without judgment, like
Mm.
You know, my dissertation in when I did my master's in occupational therapy was around looking at life skills and
Mm,
rehabilitation um, of prisoners when they come out of prisons,
mm,
and you know, kind of, you know, how important that is to stop the reoffending like statistics, you know, and
mm,
kind of like for, you know, when people come out of prison services, for them
mm,
to really be supporting in that, in those life skills and rehabilitation, so
mm,
that they don't like have to return
mm, mm,
to
mm,
prison. Um, and I really, you know, having had that occupational therapy experience in prison services and having worked as a healthcare assistant there as well, like I really believe that you know, we those occupational therapy services are so important within, you know, not just prison services, but like, you know, and not just mental health settings, but in order, you know, we're training mental health, physical health, learning disability,
mm,
and you know, it's a shame that it was that occupational therapy service was only available for people just with mental health
mm,
um yeah sort of challenges, because I
mm,
do think that you know, if you really equip people with those sort of like everyday activities of daily living,
mm,
um, and engage in meaningful participation, like having that occupational therapy input within prison services, and you know, and not just kind of have it just for the mental health
mm,
clients, then actually it could make such a difference in
mm,
those settings, you
mm,
know, to
mm,
because you know, we're all like human beings that need um meaningful activity, and like in terms of our
mm,
day to day, you know, like
mm,
routines. So yeah, that was my kind of sort of thoughts about
yeah.
having worked within like prison services. And yes, I've worked in various mental health settings as well, and you know, I've seen the value of occupational therapy,
Mm,
you know, in kind of
yeah.
engaging in meaningful
Mm.
activities of daily living. So
Yeah, and I think I was just it just made me think as well because especially like in a sort of multidisciplinary team, it was like that was where I kind of saw like how being really person-centered, you could really advocate for that person and you
mm,
where you might have other people who'd think, oh, they need to do X, Y, or Z, or they need to do this. And because you were in communication with that person and you were really interested in their view and what was important to them, you could often kind of challenge that at times and rather than kind of creating kind of care or support that was somebody else's agenda or somebody else's idea of like what they needed, which is likely to be less sustainable, you could kind of really advocate for it being attuned and tied to that individual person, which I think, and it's also for that person feels, they feel more seen and heard and kind of
yeah.
respected and attuned to.
Yeah, and I think with offenders, obviously, we're not condoning, um, you know, their crimes, offences, and so on. What we're saying as occupational therapy therapists is that when you are standing from a place of person-centered, holistic care, and taking, you know, kind of like those biases that we have as human beings, you really can make such a therapeutic, like positive difference to that person's
Mm.
life, like to the point where it's like transformational. So, you know, what did working in those kind of high risk and high intensity environments teach you about boundaries, risk, human behavior, and therapeutic presence?
Yeah, so I think in terms of boundaries, I think that process of working there like started my sort of process of reflection of how we can work therapeutically, how we can kind of give of ourselves in a way that is sustainable, that is healthy, that is supportive, so that we are not giving from a place of our own need or our own agenda. And I think working there kind of helped me really attune to that, and noticing in myself, especially, if I felt like maybe, my boundaries were being challenged or crossed, I just became much more sensitive and attuned to my embodied sense of that, so that if I was making decisions about what was appropriate or how I was engaging, I was attuning to that. So it was always that kind of barometer of what felt right and what didn't, fundamentally. And I think that really kind of supported, my risk assessment. And obviously you would have all the information and the detail, and then you'd also be working with somebody, or in a situation, so you're using the kind of dynamic information of what you're faced with, as well as historic information. But I was also using my own embodied kind of sense, to let me know, when things perhaps didn't feel right, and I would need to kind of draw a boundary. And I think that having all of that and operating in that way enabled me to kind of assess and work in a way that was kind of attuned to the situation, so that I could then, maybe take more positive risk opportunities, because I had faith and trust in myself, in knowing like how I would need to act if something did occur. So I think that, yeah, having to be kind of more acutely aware of that because of the setting kind of really supported that. And I think in terms of my therapeutic presence, I think being able to kind of hold those aspects, enabled me to have more of a sense of safety,
Mm.
stability and security, and trust and faith in myself. And I think that if that's your experience, then that is also what you are offering with others. And I think that only kind of grew and developed, and I just have more faith and trust in that, and that actually being a safe, stable, steady presence was, a real therapeutic kind of, I want to say tool, but like a therapeutic presence, I guess.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that you use yourself and your intuition like as a therapeutic use of self,
Mm.
and creating that safe space just by having your presence there. It's incredible, isn't it? What can happen? And I know that when we've had a chat before, you mentioned that it's really about kind of facilitating like that psychologically safe space for um to get the best out of people because
Mm.
uh you know uh I really believe that everybody has, and I know you believe this as well, that we all have the answers within us. So like how can we facilitate a space that can get the best out of people, that they can feel, that they can be their most optimal selves. You've said that occupational therapy felt especially important in those settings because
Mm.
it supported people to build meaningful lives beyond labels and
Mm.
histories. What did good occupational therapy make possible there?
Yeah, so I think in those settings, I would often work with people as they were like nearing the end of their time in that unit. So we did quite a lot of like transition work. So we'd be really supporting people to explore community activities, engagement, whether it's work, voluntary work, hobbies, leisure, just even getting familiar with new areas they might be moving to, all of that kind of thing. So yeah, that was an important part of my work. And I think like day to day, we kind of would just look at, what interested people, what motivated them, and helping them kind of develop routine and structure around those things. And a lot of work we did was also around food, because it's always like such a big motivator. So we'd often, we'd try cooking different things, and you'd always be kind of led, by people's interests and seasons and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was trying to really, like, you didn't want to be the dictator, like, oh, we're doing this, every day or whatever. You were always trying to use that rapport and knowledge and connection with people to kind of design activities and groups and stuff that kind of would support them and kind of help them feel connected. But I
Mm,
think, especially at that unit, the power that it had there was its sense of community.
mm,
And I think that, even though, you think of it as being like not a very nice place, like the fact that people knew you, the people were interested in you, that there was places that they could work in a cafe or care for animals, and it was all together. And I think that was, yeah, like a real part of the healing process and support process.
wow, I love that. And you've actually
Mm,
also worked with children and families
mm,
in creative relational ways
mhm,
using activity, nature, animals, and crafts.
mm.
What has stayed consistent in your way of working, even across such different settings?
Yeah, so this is where I'm currently working. And I think what has kind of stayed consistent is just, like, I guess it's just being in that place of curiosity and interest. And as time has gone on, I think, as my own self-knowledge and understanding has increased, it has kind of allowed me to create more space in the therapeutic relationship for the other person to really be present, um and I'm not trying to bring an agenda. I'm not trying to alter the kind of status quo. I'm very reflective and considered about um, any intervention. And the first point I will always be at is just to really show interest and curiosity as to this person's experience. And yeah, I think that has kind of just developed um, across that, really. Um,
Mm,
yeah. And I guess it's also, again, like, I just, the more I have worked and had my career, the more I've been able to recognize, like, there's so many ways to, like, do one thing, like, we
mm,
might bake a cake in a certain way and someone else might do it a different way. And it's like,
mm,
the more I have just been able to really be at peace with that, and to
mm,
actually um, not be diving in to tell people how to do things, or, trying to alter their process or how they're doing things. And I think that, in our culture and spaces, there's not often a lot of space for that, is to actually just see what happens and
yeah,
not
I
try and
absolutely.
control it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely whilst you were saying all of this, I was reflecting on my experience of being of having worked in human resources, which was for about a decade. And then I was also reflecting on having been a manager uh and an employee, and everything you were saying there just kind of made me think like, wow, this is such a beautiful approach that you take in terms of kind of, sort of having that considered, what I would call diplomatic approach to,
Mm,
sort of yeah, seeing how the ways of working
mm,
is being done, and then also having that open mind to actually, introducing, your own sort of approach, and
mm,
but really kind of being having that fluid and flexible thinking about,
mm,
kind of that not a one size fits all, or that your way is the way forward, like
mm,
um and I think there's a lot from what you've said that that whether people are in a leadership position as managers or if you're an employee, I think there's a lot of wisdom from what you've said that they can take from that. Yeah, because you're very experienced individual in your career and you've had so much varied experiences, but it's so nice to to really see your humbling, approach to ways of doing things. So your website actually describes your approach as person-centered, integrative, focused on meaning, active and explorative. What do those words mean in practice when you're working with someone?
Yeah, I think when I use those words, I suppose it's kind of describing the relationship that um, my approach to kind of working with people, and just to, again, to just be really tuned in to the individual, and just being curious, showing interest in, what's meaningful to them, what's challenging to them, what's kind of flowing, what's working well. And the sort of integrative part, I guess, is that as a therapist now, I'm really interested in using all of my experience, all of my skills and training, and to be able to present that as like an integrated whole. So it's like I'm not separating myself into, giving OT advice or, working in a like working as a wild therapist. It's bringing the two together, and I guess it is because of my experience that I now, the position I hold and the way I work and interact, I feel has kind of brought all of those bits together. um and I guess in my approach and my way of working, I am wanting it, as I said before, to be something that is co-created. And as an OT, I'm always interested in meaningful activity. So if there are aspects of that can be brought into therapy, whether it's in discussion or activity, I'm open to that. And I guess it's kind of creating a partnership, where things can be brought, discussed, and considered, and kind of a way that suits somebody to work can be arrived at. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for non-clinicians and
Mm,
people who don't really know
mm,
about occupational therapy, when we talk
mm,
about meaningful activities, is it actually can just be our basic activities of daily living, like
mm, mm,
getting
mm,
up, you know, the whole routine, brushing
mm,
brushing our teeth, brushing our hair, self-care, washing and dressing, toileting.
mm,
So all the things that, cooking, eating and drinking, like all of the things that we do on a day to day, that's kind of, second nature and like we don't think
mm,
about it,
mm,
Um,
mm.
so yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of clarify that because I guess for people who don't know what we mean when we talk about meaningful activities, that is a meaningful activity because that's something
Yeah.
that we do naturally without thinking.
Mm, mm,
And then when obviously when there is kind of, an impairment, or an injury, and when it means that actually we can't do those kind of basic tasks
mm,
that we used to be able to before, we had before any impairment and injury, then we really realize, wow, like actually, I'm not able to function in the way that I used to
mm,
be able to. So
mm,
yeah, I think that kind of because I guess when people say meaningful, I guess probably some people might have a notion of, oh, like, is it something kind of like something quite grand that's meaningful, but
yes,
actually no,
yeah.
it's like we're stripping it right back to the basics. Like when we
Mm,
talk about meaningful activities, it can be really anything that um people do on a day to day to
mm,
participate in everyday life, isn't it? So,
mm,
so
mm,
you actually work with adults, children, and carers. How does
mhm.
your approach stay rooted in the same values while adapting to different people and life stages?
Yeah, so my current work, I work with children and families. So I have really valued that opportunity to kind of use and develop my skills, I suppose, in that. But yeah, I guess thinking of like adults and an adult and child dynamic, um, I guess again, it's I really attune to who I'm with and what their needs are and how they're kind of presenting in that moment. And I guess as a therapist, how I've evolved, I have come to a point where I I I don't feel that I edit myself in how I work with different groups because I'm always returning to a point of curiosity and interest, and also kind of trusting and being interested in the unique kind of skills or challenges that that person or that that child and parent are presenting with. And I guess because of how I work now is less focused on like trying to fix or trying to like just look at the challenges. I'm really interested in the whole perspective. And what I'm really interested in is being able to just hold the space for what needs to come up and needs to be explored to come up. So I'm kind of like taking my own responsibility for like fixing away. So I'm just more in a curious place with what might evolve from that kind of work together.
Mm. And looking back, when did you begin to feel that the way you had been trained or the way services often worked no longer fully matched how you wanted to practice?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a gradual process. But I remember when I was working sort of in early intervention in psychosis, and I could really see the value of the kind of therapeutic relationship you had with someone. But it was always kind of trying to carve out space for that really because there was always many responsibilities and expectations in terms of documentation or assessment and various different things. So I felt in the end kind of compromised because my capacity to be present and open to somebody was impacted because I was overloaded by
Mm.
the kind of tasks and responsibilities. And yeah, it was I loved the kind of because with early intervention you work for quite a long period with people in quite a intensive way, and I valued that, but I felt conflicted. So it was at that point that I kind of knew I wanted to sort of explore other ways of working and how I could kind of have the therapeutic space as more protected and as more a core part of what I was doing, I guess.
Mm. And it just shows, doesn't it, that our like our environment, wherever it is, in workspaces, where you were talking there, it just made me reflect on how kind of processes, systems, structures,
Mm,
ways of working can really like conflict with like the way we want to be able to practice to get the best
mm,
out of like
mm,
our way of practicing,
mm,
and
mm,
it can actually hinder like
mm,
our way to get the best out of both the client and ourselves in terms of job
mm.
satisfaction, particularly like from
Yes.
what you were talking about there.
Mm,
What I'm hearing is around, you wanted to be able to have that space to create like, better job satisfaction for you in order
mm,
to
mm,
really kind of foster that therapeutic relationship
mm, mm,
even further.
mm, mm, mm,
Yeah, so that's really interesting. You've said that's part of your identity and self-worth
mm,
became tied up in making others better. When did
mm,
you start noticing that within yourself?
mm. Yes, I think that was like, I remember when I worked in vocational rehab as part of a community mental health team. And I remember like a psychologist just brought like an article. It was something like, the title was like The Wounded Healer. And I was like, oh, like this is really interesting. And I think it was at that point that I started to reflect on my own, like what had brought me into doing this work, and what were my own kind of what were my own needs around that. So it kind of it set me off on quite a reflective kind of process around that. And I think especially when I, changed jobs, and then I was in early intervention in psychosis, and I as time went on, the kind of intensity of the work and the workload, I became more and more burnt out. And it was at that point that I was like really faced with like, deeper levels of reflection in terms of why this wasn't sustainable, and what was kind of occurring in that. And it was after that that I then decided to do the wild therapy training, um,
Mm.
which was then like a massive like year-long kind of deep dive into like everything. So it was like a kind of journey to the point where I couldn't function in the way that I wanted to. I felt really depleted and burnt out, and I knew something had to change. I couldn't carry on the
Mm.
way I had been working or living.
Mm.
And yeah, I made that decision to do that training as a way. It just called to me at that point.
Wow. We're going to deep into this
Mm.
deeply in a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask what helped you move from a more rescuing role
Mm.
into one that feels more grounded, more trusting, and more congruent.
Mm. I think I think the more reflective I became of my own drivers, my own motives, and like really holding space and check in with that, really enabled me to kind of notice perhaps more from where I was operating at different times.
Mm.
Um, and I think also as I became more aware of the position that you're in healthcare and the NHS and all of that. You're kind of in a position of power, and I sort of reflected more about how, although we were aware of it and we really try and like minimize it and that kind of thing, like fundamentally, if you're part of something like that, you are holding a level of power. And I think the more I became aware of actually how some of that could then disempower people, which kind of sets you up in a bit of a dependence position. Like, a healthcare worker knows the answers or can solve the problems or can get you the right medication or whatever it is. You're then then kind of insinuates to a person, what are their resources? What's their capacity
Mm.
to support themselves?
Mm.
So I guess I became more aware of how it was presenting in me, but also how the organisations and structures were also sometimes setting up for that too. Um, and I guess with more increased awareness and just deciding to work in different environments where I could kind of just work in a different way, less kind of prescriptive or, in a power position, things kind of shifted, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. So interesting. So
Mm.
yeah, now I wanted to kind of dive into um your, wild therapy, nature, and integrative practice in this part of the podcast. So yeah, could you explain what wild therapy is in a way that feels accessible for people who may not have come across it before?
Mm. Yes, yeah. And I think it can be hard to kind of understand. And I remember like when I was drawn to it, I never really fully knew exactly like what it was, but it was more for me. it was like an embodied experience. And I guess with wild therapy, it's sort of seeking to recognize like our intrinsic wild nature, um, in terms of our kind of embodied experience and the wisdom of our own feelings, emotions, and I guess for me, wild therapy is kind of like going back to basics, and being aware of the layers of the agendas, of which traditional, when we work in traditional structures and organizations can kind of place on us. So yeah, wild therapy is a way of bringing people back into contact with that, and whether it's using the natural world, whether being in it physically, or if you're working with somebody that is attuned to that in themselves, that they have kind of come back to that place of contact internally, then you're sort of trusting in a process that isn't linear. It's not like traditional. You're trusting their own innate creativity, exploration, and trust. You're kind of opening to a journey of like kind of returning to an internally led way of being, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And speaking of which, I actually, I really believe in kind of like, a state of flow of how things happen in our lives. So I actually took part in nature therapy. Maria Morris, occupational therapy, actually facilitated a nature therapy based session for me last
Mm,
weekend in the
mm,
New Forest, and it was absolutely
oh,
incredible. And I'd just like to share something that happened as part of the session. So I was actually she made me visualize in terms of kind of walking through this path, and she called it for me to imagine that I'm walking through this magical path towards
mm,
my future self. Of where I would be, within 6 months as I'm starting out in
mm,
this entrepreneurial journey with
mm, mm,
Function First Care. And actually, as I was walking through this path, as I first started walking through the path, there was two cyclists that
mm,
came down the path, and I wondered kind of what symbolic meaning that would mean for me in terms of kind of what cycles I might have to go through in
mm,
my entrepreneurial journey. And then as I actually sat on a bench at the end of this magical path, she asked me to kind of really imagine my future self in
mm,
6 months. And as I sat down, I actually had and this was captured on video. I'm so pleased that it was captured on video. Um, so I could actually show people
mm,
this amazing metaphor, I guess. But there's a butterfly that actually, as I sat down and as she said
mm,
for me to imagine my future self in 6 months, a butterfly actually landed on my right lap and just stayed there for a while, and then as kind of like, and then as I was looking at it, and it kind of, yeah, it stayed there for a while, and flew off, and I thought, wow, it was a beautiful, butterfly, and it just kind of flew off after a while of sitting on my lap, um and it just made me think of the transformational journey I'm on, and it was such I mean, there's so many symbolic meanings you could attach to
mm,
having a butterfly
mm,
like
mm,
that, but especially in that moment. And I think so many different um aspects like that happen in my life where it's intangible, you can't really explain it. There's loads of,
mm,
I guess, meanings you can attach to it, and I really pay attention to that. And in fact, I actually um journal it on my on a notepad on my phone, and I call it Godly Intervention Journal. And actually I really believe in kind of like these kind of when you're really self-aware and tap into kind of divine interventions
mm,
that happen, that when you're really self-aware, loads of things happen in a state of flow like that in my life.
Mm,
And when you really pay attention, you really feel that something kind of, something bigger and unexplainable, like to us, is sort of there protecting you with
mm,
with this energy and aura. And yeah, people who are listening to this, there's there's bound to be skeptics, but
mm,
I definitely have felt a lot of instances in my life where
mm,
where things have happened to either take me out of a sort of a situation where I wasn't supposed to be in, to protect me,
mm,
and this seems to, and I seem to be going through periods of like flow in my life,
mm,
where like, so after I had that nature-based therapy session last weekend, I then had a I did a podcast with yesterday actually with Tracy, another occupational therapist whose service is called Mother Nature Coaching. And now today I've got you, and I just think like, again, that's a
mm,
step of flow for me, and I kind of like pay attention to
mm,
those things. Like it
mm,
wasn't planned to be that way, but it's kind of, it happens to be that way. And
mm,
again, people might call it whatever you want to call it, synchronicities, coincidences, divine or godly interventions,
mm,
like I do. But yeah, like I like to, yeah, my terminology for that that I like to call it is godly interventions, because I just think like, on in a day to day where, life can be challenging, when you pay attention to, you know, these events that happen in our lives, is just beautiful. Like, and it really can, that's why I believe, whether you have a religion or spirit, whether you're a spiritual or whatever you tend to kind of draw to
mm,
support your, health and well-being, holistically, it really does help. It really does
mm,
help. And I've
mm,
seen that in a
mm,
lot of people, and a lot of people, and my loved ones, like, I've got a lot of loved ones that are spiritual,
mm,
and faith actually has really helped them in their health and well-being, um, and it is a part of rehabilitation,
mm, mm,
So yeah, I guess on that note, I just wanted to kind of share that. And
mm,
I wanted to ask you about, I know you mentioned you completed a year-long wild therapy training. That sounds
mm, mm,
deeply experiential and
mm,
personally transformative. What
mm.
what first drew you to that training?
Yeah, so it was interesting because my partner, somebody had shared it with him, and it wasn't quite right for him. And I was interested in it at the time, but it wasn't. I didn't follow it up. But it was only a few months later, I think, where I'd been kind of experiencing that period of burnout and just feeling a bit lost, that I saw it again, and for some reason I was like, oh, like I feel like this is like exactly what I kind of need right now. um but yeah, so I that's kind of how I was drawn to it, and I just met with the facilitators just online. And again, it was like, I guess I was in a more, kind of the traditional kind of professional expectations, and wondering about accreditation and that sort of thing. But what I took away from that was just, I really felt like just really seen by them in a way that I had never really experienced, I don't think. So it was just like a something internally just felt like, oh wow, like that feels different. That feels like, yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, that after that, I just kind of, yeah, took the plunge with it really. Yeah, what was the other? Was that the main question? I've forgotten.
And yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that, yeah, that was it. And then the training
Yeah.
involved actually gradually building up your ability to be in nature for longer
Mm,
periods,
mm,
including, extended time in one place.
mm,
What
mm.
was that experience like?
Yeah, so. I think the nature of the training, because we would go on these residentials, it was about 4 times a year for around 5 days. And so you would kind of leave behind all your roles, all the stuff we think of as OTs, like our routines, our roles, all our kind of comforts, our relationships. So you were kind of stripped of all that.
Mm-hmm.
And you were kind of popped in this group of 12 people with 2 facilitators, and we kind of
Mm-hmm.
lived and kind of just, cooked together and created a little community. So it was like in that process of coming away from everything that is familiar, um, when I landed there, it felt like I was like naked, like I felt very exposed,
Mm,
because all of the things that we might use to stop us really being in contact with our deeper experience, our feelings, or whatever is under there, you no longer have that. And so you have to really sit with that. And so, yeah, so that was part of the process. And then the other part was building up this time that you were sat in nature. So you build it up over the residentials, and it started with like an hour and it ended up to, I think it was 12 hours. And I suppose the the holistic experience of being there, but also still having the 2 facilitators who were kind of remained in contact with you. They weren't rescuing you. They weren't kind of being over involved with you, but they were present and they were compassionate, and they were like just witnessing to whatever was unfolding. Obviously, they would be there available if you needed more support, but they weren't trying to rescue you from your own stuff.
mm,
So they were like present and compassionate and witnesses. And then when we were in nature, like when we were in the wild became that presence and that witness. Um, and I just remember over the time, there was a process that occurred for me. I remember one time it was like it was raining for like hours, and we had to sit for 6 hours, and initially, like, I just felt like such like anger, like that we were having to do this. And but during that time there was a process for me, and that I kind of became aware that actually I could just get wet and I could just withstand this. It wasn't gonna, it wasn't gonna affect me in the long term. And actually, my reaction to it was the thing that was more like I was suffering from more. And if I could just accept how it was, the kind of anger and all of that kind of just moved, and I just built more and more capacity to be with my own discomfort, and know that I could stand it. Yeah.
love that. Actually, I've noticed on the necklace you're wearing, it's a piece of nature, isn't it? Like, would you like to
Yes.
describe? It looks
Yeah.
like sort of like a trunk of a tree. Like, what is it?
Yeah. So it's a slice of a pine cone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then it's glazed. I think they're like from America, but yeah,
Oh,
and
that's
it,
lovely. Is
yeah.
it a real pine cone then, and that is
Yes.
glazed?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
wow. That's
yeah,
gorgeous.
yeah.
Love that you have a piece of nature for you. Very on brand.
Yeah.
Um, so you've described the kind of that process as stripping away kind of roles and comforts and familiar ways of relating and forcing you to sit with what was underneath. What did that reveal to you?
Um, I think it revealed to me all the ways in which I was sort of functioning, that were kind of from like patterns or coping mechanisms that I'd learned, in terms of like how I would abandon myself, and, to be liked or to connect with people, I would have a capacity to overextend and to kind of appear how I would imagine people would want me to appear. And when I arrived there, like suddenly all those ways of functioning, like
Mm.
I, they were, I, because the facilitators, and the others, we were in a process of kind of really operating from like a deep kind of grounded and authentic place.
Mm.
There, in authenticity, there was no place for it to be met.
Mm.
It wasn't unkind. It wasn't, it wasn't invalidating, but um, it it just yeah, it led me to kind of really be with the discomfort of that. And actually, I guess the ways I'd learnt to cope and function in the world were to avoid, feeling rejected or abandoned. And actually, some of that pain of that I had to really sit with. Yeah. And
Mm.
just, it was almost like a dismantling of, the kind of personality that I'd built to kind of prevent me from feeling some of the things that I had felt maybe when I was younger or in my life.
Wow, wow, sounds so powerful and so therapeutic. What felt most challenging or confronting about that training, would you say?
um, like it's just kind of like slow process of like realizing that actually I kind of had to be with all that. I couldn't like escape it. I couldn't like fast forward, or I couldn't just make things feel good, or I couldn't just, make other people like me. I had to like to be able to actually connect with people. I had to come back into connection with myself, and I had, through all of these patterns and ways of being, I'd lost contact with myself. So it was like yeah, it was like a real deep, painful, like
Mm.
excavation of like all of the stuff that was stopping me from actually being in contact with how I truly felt and who
Wow.
I truly was, really, I guess.
It sounds like a detox almost, like, kind
Yeah,
of like
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
kind of like,
yeah.
it's kind of like I guess stripping away the layers
Mm,
of getting to who you really like
mm,
are supposed to be, I guess.
yeah.
And actually, speaking of which, you've spoken about becoming aware of your patterns like people pleasing,
Mm, mm,
fear of rejection, and fear of abandonment. How
mm.
did how did those begin to show up more clearly once you've went through the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like during the process, really,
Mm.
I just felt very alone. I just felt like incredibly alone. But I think I felt alone because the ways in which I was used to connecting with people, like I suddenly realized like that it was not from a place of true connection. So it was kind of like a bit like in, like the Wizard of Oz, like when they find out, it's like the wizard, it doesn't exist and it's like a machine. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was like I was
Mm.
like face to face with like the reality of how I'd sort of been functioning.
Mm.
And yeah, it was very sobering, and it was,
Mm.
but it was almost like unless I'd had that opportunity to really see through some of this and kind of really contact it, my life and me would have only ever been layered upon this stuff. I would have become further and further away from myself, being in contact with myself, and I wouldn't have been able to kind of connect with people in the way that I am able to now. And that's what I no longer feel alone, because I'm in contact with myself.
Love that.
there's a kind of a coming together, a kind of more of a sense of wholeness that I have now than I ever had before.
Mm,
Um,
I love that. It sounds like you've really come home to yourself, and like a
mm,
like the process was really like a revelation
mm,
for
mm,
for who you are, and who
mm,
you could be, I guess, during that
yeah.
process, you
Mm,
know. Um,
mm,
and what was it like to be around people who were present, grounded, and not rescuing you from your
mm.
discomforts?
Yeah, it was just like, it's hard to explain because it was kind of like a presence, and it created a level of safety and stability that I could really like contact some of that. And I think it was their capacity to kind of trust my process. They weren't trying to over involve themselves. They were available, they were present. Um, and so I knew that I could approach them, I knew that I could contact them if I needed. And that put me back in a place of power. It wasn't that I was being done to, or they weren't like intervening too much, but it when I was able to seek help or support, it was like I felt empowered in doing it. So it
Mm,
was kind of, yeah, it was kind of somehow like reparenting, I think, like parts, like child parts that were then able to kind of step up and be like, oh, actually I need this. Or
mm,
it kind of led me to, yeah, develop and feel more in control, or able to kind of know that I can seek what I need. I can identify and seek what I need. And as time went on, I built more and more capacity to kind of be with those child parts myself.
wow, that's so, yeah, I guess we all need that, don't we? Yes,
Yeah.
because there's I guess there's a lot of parts of us that are fragmented as we're growing up, you know? So how did that experience change the way you think about healing and about what people most need from a therapist?
Mm. I think like it was just it just amazed me what like just being in contact with people who were deeply in contact and in connection with themselves. Like it felt that witnessing, or that their awareness of me somehow triggered this process of unfolding, and this healing, or journey, or whatever it was. It was almost like a spontaneous um evolution or eruption. Like, I think when from that first point on the Zoom, whatever it was, like feelings theme, um it kind of it I don't know, it just set in motion something, a kind of transformational process. And
Mm,
but if at any point that had somebody had like tried to rescue you from your distress, or try to intervene, it would have taken it off on a different trajectory. Whereas the trajectory they allowed and trusted in meant that that was the exact process that I needed to undergo, or to be with, to kind of like reorientate myself back, or recontact my own kind of adult or
mm,
core part. It was, yeah, because that's what they embodied.
mm,
It kind of reflected uh, that part in me saw that part in them. And
mm.
then like I had to kind of go through all the kind of
Wow.
the challenge to kind of unearth it, and to like come back to it, really, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that you've done so much inner work on yourself because
Mm,
I think it's so important for healthcare professionals
mm,
to really do the work within
mm,
themselves, you know,
mm, mm,
and because we are supporting really vulnerable individuals
mm,
out there, so like having doing the inner work in ourselves can really be transformational in terms of like how we support our
mm,
clients, you know, when we
definitely.
have that self-awareness. So you've said that this was a radical shift in your practice,
Mm,
moving from rescuing people from discomfort to trusting their process within it.
mm, mm.
What changed for you after that?
Yeah, I think the more I was in contact with my internal experience, and the more I could be with my own discomfort, I developed increased capacity to be with others' discomfort. Whereas I think where I would struggle to be with my own discomfort, if somebody was distressed, you'd want to, you wouldn't want them to be sad, you wouldn't want them to be in distress. So you would then kind of leave your center to kind of
Mm,
rescue them.
mm,
But this is so much, also a part of our society and culture, and that's what I had observed and been a part of. And so it was just kind of because I'd experienced the power of it. I just felt like, that actually it wasn't my place to rescue somebody or to divert something from their process. But what I could do was be it present and in contact and compassionate. And
mm,
actually, that's a far greater um, offering, because you are trusting them to withstand that, and you're giving you're attuning your support to them. Obviously, at times some people might need more support, but you're having a fundamental trust in that person, and that helps build their trust in themselves to be with themselves. um
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that. And nature seems to be much more than a backdrop in your work. You know, you've
Mm.
described it as witness, as and co-therapist.
Mm.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess when we return to nature, when we return to the wild, I mean, it is our bedrock, our source, our environment, and we are not, disconnected from that. Although, sometimes we feel that, and the way we live becomes more like that. By being present and attuned to nature, we are, it's almost like inviting um like that nurturance, that deep like love and connection of a mother, and we are in that sense, the earth's children. And however, esoteric or spiritual want to go, but it's like a sort of homecoming. And I think for me it's like, how can we even like think to exist if we're not existing in connection with that which gives us life.
Mm,
um and I suppose the idea of the co-therapist is that, the a bit like you shared in your experience in the New Forest, like the wild and nature is alive, it's its
mm,
own flow ecosystem, the way things arrive and move, and it's on a whole different like time. It's
yeah,
out of time, like
yes, yeah.
um so in terms of being a co-therapist, you're trusting that the aliveness of the
Mm,
earth, nature, and the wild will interact with you. You're opening a space for that interaction, and you're, attuning to the intelligence of life, and being open to what it can communicate, just like your experience.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of like flow earlier,
Mm.
I was just reflecting on what you were saying just now, and another thing that I didn't mention, I forgot to mention, was that yesterday, my friend took me to this exhibition. It was very spontaneous, like in terms of we didn't know what exhibition we would see, and it was a
Mm.
beautiful free exhibition in London. And it was by this artist called Simone Brewster, and it was like it was
Mm.
beautiful. She basically uses kind of really tunes into material in a sustainable way,
Mm.
and um kind of and then kind of designs from that really
Mm.
um grounded, deep spiritual space. And
Mm.
I loved seeing her work. And then one thing that really resonated with me amongst many with her work was that she mentioned that, when she was using when she uses wood for her
Mm.
work, um, wood is something really precious, because it
Mm.
takes years for,
Mm.
for wood for actually you know would to be of existence. It grows for
Mm.
many many
Mm.
years,
Mm.
and it's
Mm.
just something that I felt like, wow, we take it so much for granted, like the the things that we use with wood. It could be anything,
Mm.
in terms of kind of a piece of furniture or something we use for our day-to-day like lives and activities. And yeah, it really gave me more of an appreciation
Mm.
for nature, and and it's so beautiful. Um,
Mm.
speaking of all of this, how do you work with the symbolism, metaphor, or
Mm.
felt meaning of what someone encounters in nature?
Mm. Mm. So I guess it's being in that open and receptive state, like myself, and in terms of working with somebody and in nature and outdoors. And I guess it starts by just being aware and noticing, and I guess it's sort of supporting people to tune in to their kind of embodied kind of response to things. So it could be, in terms of which way to move or which way to walk, or to be led internally. So kind of dropping out of that kind of cognitive way of doing things to more like an embodied experience. So that would be a way to initially kind of begin that process, and just working with them around what becomes observed for them, what do they notice. And I guess, depending on the person, it is, whether it's something that was offered, that I might observe, or whether it's supporting them to notice meanings, or to work together to kind of explore that. But I guess it's being in that open and receptive space, and being curious as to what like we might encounter, as we journey, as we walk, as we move. Yeah, and just holding a space where, it's also bringing online our sensory experience. So, sort of attuning to sound and sight and smell.
Mm,
And so it might not necessarily just be a visual thing, it might be, the smell of things or the touch of things, and kind
mm,
of returning to that sort of animal like experience of life and the world around us. And I guess again, it's so it wouldn't be, I'd be not in a space of necessarily directing, but inviting and exploring, but also supporting somebody's developing expression and somebody's developing interest in what's leading them. Yeah.
yeah. And actually, when you talked about the senses, it made me reflect on my experience in the New Forest, facilitated by Maria Morris and Occupational Therapist. It was, yeah, amazing, because I was really she talked me through really tuning into my senses,
Mm.
to each of my different senses, to be
Mm.
in touch with nature. And I think a lot of the times, as human beings in this fast-paced life, we can um, be so on autopilot that we forget to
mm,
tune in to really be present in all those senses that we
mm,
have as human beings, and to really be like um connected to nature, which we should, we
mm,
should really be living in that
mm,
integrative way with nature, because
mm,
we are dependent on each other.
mm,
So, you, when we'd spoken before, you'd given me an example of seeing a road cutting through woodland and
mm,
connecting that to something internal.
mm,
How do those moments become therapeutically meaningful?
mm. I guess for me, if I'm out and I might set an intention for, I guess, a kind of sort of a medicine journey, or I'm just opening a space, like a kind of sacred space where I am wanting to relate, I'm wanting to open, I'm wanting to attune to the natural world and to be um led and guided, and a kind of natural sort of symbiosis in that. And yeah, so I mean, even yesterday, whenever I go out, it's different, and you just don't know, But I was walking through the woods again, and I kind of was trusting, to be led, and I wasn't looking at the map, and I was just like going with the flow. But then I noticed, like, when I was going to be going like off of the main path, I could feel, the kind of some sense of anxiety or fear or foreboding. And even, it made me think of this, me wanting to work independently in my own practice, and what does it feel like to step away from like the traditional, the clear, the open. So I was noticing that, and it kind of reflected to me that. But then I was able to be with that, notice the fear, notice the anxiety, but trust that something was guiding me and leading me. And then I could hear water, and it just made me kind of think that although at times we feel we are lost, or we are, without direction, there's still something in us that is pulling us forward, or giving us clues. And especially, like in terms of water, just the natural rhythm and flow and journey of that. I kind of was then walking along, and in just enjoying being alongside that. And even that sort of process for me was just a reminder that although, when you step off of the kind of well-beaten track, like, there's going to be your own fears, your own anxieties, there's going to be everyone else's, there's going to be all that coming. But it's like, that there's something that is pulling you forward. There's some reason that you're going that way. And I suppose it's, yeah, just like coming into contact with that, and knowing that just because you're afraid or anxious, it doesn't mean that it's not the right way for you at the time. And you're the only one that knows. Because of
Mm.
that, if you're trusting that kind of inner guidance, then the path is your own.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I would love to see, a world, hopefully in the near future, where GPs, doctors
Mm,
prescribe nature,
mm,
to
mm,
to to patients, and instead of medication,
mm, mm,
where it's appropriate to actually say,
mm,
you know, actually, have you thought about connecting with nature,
mm,
and kind of doing, you know, connecting with their own bodies through different forms of
mm,
activities in terms of like the exercise. And
mm,
exercise can look very different for many people. It doesn't have to be just, in the gym. So yeah, it would be lovely to see, more of a world where people actually connecting through their inner selves,
mm,
for through nature, through connection with
mm,
nature for healing, um, rather than kind of seeking for the external. supports, I guess. Because I
Mm.
think, um, uh, in society, my observation is that when there's kind of like an illness, injury,
Mm.
impairment, um, the first port of call sometimes tends to be of going to like an external provider,
Mm.
and or medication to heal oneself. But actually, um, what would be nice would be to actually see a world where, we're really challenging the status quo and seeing what
Mm.
actually, how about we firstly think about doing, having all of our basics met in terms of our
Mm.
lifestyle, like connecting with nature, the way we're eating, drinking, like nurturing our ecosystem within our gut,
Mm.
like our the activities we're taking part in day to day, like our exercise, like having really that non-pharmacological approach.
Mm.
Ayurveda has been something that's been existing for like 5,000
Mm.
years,
Mm.
and really kind of connecting to sort of like the plant-based world out there and how nourishing and nurturing it is for our systems. And I
Mm.
think I would love to see like a world where we're really tuning into that first and foremost
Mm.
before kind of like having all the other external like
Mm.
modalities that people tend to turn to,
Mm.
um, you know, uh, for periods of like injuries, impairments, illness. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think especially in our kind of culture and society, where people do live more separately, like, fundamentally, like what do we have like within the community, like what can we support each other with that's kind of already there. And yeah, and I think it's like empowering people to also kind of be aware of what might support them and trying different things, and
Yeah.
yeah, all of that really. Yeah. But I think it's kind of like we have to come back into contact with each other and ourselves, and kind of finding ways to do that really. But yeah, I think community is the kind of core of that really, like.
And what do you think about what is it about nature that helps people come into contact with themselves differently?
Um, I think it's because when we're in contact with nature, it's pointing to a place in us, our true nature, our kind of
Mm.
wild essence that through a lot of, society and the way things are, we kind of lose touch with that, whether it's, from being indoors a lot of the time, and our kind of routines and habits that are like put onto us through work or through, responsibilities, that we kind of gradually like lose contact with that. And so we're kind of operating externally to meet external kind of expectations and ways of being. And I think being in nature, it's actually, it's separate to like all of the man-made stuff, and
Yes,
it's
absolutely,
just
yeah.
pointing us back to that, really, I
And
think.
and there is so much evidence around
Mm.
the benefits to our health and well-being
Mm.
with nature. So
Mm.
the more that this becomes, the more education that we provide to people around this
Mm.
as healthcare professionals in a regulated profession, the more
Mm.
that people will, it'll be like a light bulb moment for people, and it'll be
Mm.
really like a revelation, like
Mm.
it has been for both of us.
Mm.
What do you think becomes possible for someone when they are truly witnessed rather than fixed?
Mm. I think if somebody is witnessed, compassionately in an attuned way, at times, there may need to be more contact. It's responsive to the individual, but I think what it enables is that person's own, life force, their own resources, to kind of come to life, and that their own psychological process, their own life journey, is not it's not being hindered, it's not being done to, in the same way, that we see in nature, in ecosystems, like life finds a way, and things have a relationship and a way of being and moving that is true to them. And if you can trust that, if you can really like, just allow that, then, there's so much can come from that. And actually that's like the beauty of like being a natural being and living in a natural world is
Mm.
growth and change and yeah.
And I guess what would you say to people who are skeptical about all of, all of these interventions and modalities we're talking
Mm,
about, from, I guess, from different, different individuals, whether it's, kind of, if, for example, a clinical and rehabilitation case
mm,
manager was to recommend a an occupational therapy working in nature therapy,
mm,
and if there was kind of like skepticism around that from the fund
mm,
holder, particularly, in, kind of in the medico legal world,
mm,
where, the case manager makes recommendation um,
mm,
to the fund holder around somebody's like rehabilitation after a
mm.
catastrophic injury. And yeah, whether it's that industry or other like individuals, you know, how can we sort of, yeah, how can how can we get people to believe in this if they
Yeah.
don't already, because
Mm,
there's I'm sure there's a lot of people in different industries, including the medical legal world, that really actually do believe that, especially with the
mm,
evidence that this is
mm,
actually this is very real. But I
mm,
guess what I'm trying to ask is, if there are people who are not convinced by this and they
mm,
think
mm,
actually it's woohoo and it's not
mm.
real, like, yeah, what would you say to that in response?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I just respect people where they're at. And if it's not something that, they feel there is a benefit to, that I'm not putting myself in a position where I'm going to try and convince them of that. I respect that they have their own views and their way of doing things. I guess it's, it comes down to like experiential opportunities really, and that would be what I would be looking to invite people to, to challenge some of their views by experiencing it, and then that's
Yeah,
they would then be, that can then be
absolutely.
their judgment, rather than me
Yes.
trying to,
Yeah.
force anything.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
completely agree.
mm,
Um, I mean, the next part of our podcast
mm,
is around how you function,
mm,
regulate, and stay grounded. And so I'm really excited for people to tune into to this part of the
mm, mm.
podcast.